The Mercenary and the Wolves by Elaine Allen. Chapter 1. Mirka leaned against the frame of her window, staring out. She could hear there was something going on in one of the courtyards below, but while she wasn't technically restricted to her tower, her father's advisors, the three wizards known as the New Guard, didn't want her leaving her quarters. Every time she had gone downstairs in the last few months, even to the public gardens, she had immediately been surrounded by ladies' maids, guards, lords, and soldiers, suggesting she would be more comfortable in her private balcony garden. She knew why. Her elder sister, Dauphine, had all but said that Mirka would be allowed to roam as she wished if she would just acknowledge and pledge loyalty to the New Guard. But as far as she was concerned, they were just advisors who had gotten above their station. She wasn't pledging loyalty to advisors. Mirka was more than a little scared of the changes she had seen in her father the last couple of years. Her father, King Cinna, had always been a strong man, strong enough to take the throne by force when the previous king fell down in his duties. Mirka remembered him standing strong at the front of his army, marching down the streets towards the palace, the people falling over themselves to get close enough to touch his armor. And she was relatively certain it hadn't just been the eyes of a child idolizing her father. These days, King Cinna was stooped, aged well before his time, and incapable of making even the most basic decisions without looking to the New Guard. Mirka did not like thinking of herself as the kind to sit back and watch things happen. When the New Guard had first started issuing her commands as if she were a common maid, she had tried to talk to her father, and when she found herself incapable of gaining access to him without at least one of the New Guard in attendance, she had tried to talk to her mother. Then her mother had died of the plague that had raged through the country of Wolvenden 14 summers ago. That was when Mirka found herself completely cut off from her father. She had assumed her sister would side with her, but Dauphine had snorted at her concerns and told her the wizards were here to help King Cinna, and they could be far more helpful than a 10-year-old girl. Now, Mirka was barely an adult at 24, had no rank beyond princess, had no magic, didn't have the ear of any nobles. She had tried talking to the nobles, trying to get anyone on her side, but they had all either told her the New Guard was here to help or shushed her, sounding scared themselves. It had literally been years since she had been allowed to say more than a dozen words together to her father. She was still allowed to see her sister, but only when Dauphine made the time to see her. The last time Mirka had seen her, 2 weeks before, Dauphine had been off to represent the New Guard, not her father, but the New Guard, examining the new fortification along the southern coast. She had stopped by before she left to tell Mirka to stop being childish and accept the tutor the New Guard had assigned her and play the sweet, obedient princess. Mirka snorted, leaning out the window to try and see what was going on in the courtyard below. Between the dark of the early twilight and the steep angle, all she could see was that there were people with torches. Her guess was that they were searching for something. They could have been playing firefly tag for all she knew. This was absurd. She was a fucking princess. She was second in line to the throne after her sister, though even before the New Guard had shown up to help with the strange astrological events and the attacks along the borders, some nobles had been arguing that girls shouldn't inherit the throne. Of course, even as a child, Dauphine had stood up in court to argue that the previous dynasty had let women hold the throne, and there was no reason to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That was what Mirka suspected had won her sister over to the New Guard side. They were all for Dauphine inheriting, as long as they remained her advisors. But the point was, Mirka was not someone that should be locked in a tower. She pushed herself off the windowsill, her slippers tapping lightly on the cold stone floor. Sure enough, one of her lady's maids, Tara, stepped in front of her as she headed towards the stairs. "Your Highness, there seems to be a disturbance downstairs. Wouldn't you prefer to wait for it to subside before venturing anywhere?" It had been a long week of Mirka trying to do things, only to have someone suggest she would prefer to do something else. No. She went to step around the girl, but Tara put out an arm. "I must insist, Your Highness. You may not be safe beyond your chambers." Mirka snorted, muttering, "I'm not sure I'm safe in my chambers anymore." She ducked under her maid's arm and pushed out the door to the stairs. There was a guard just outside the door. He turned to her as the door opened, and his halberd tilted down, blocking the path. "Can I help you, Your Highness?" Mirka felt her face go flush, and not in embarrassment. "Why am I under guard?" "To keep you safe, your highness. There has been a disturbance in the palace." Mirka barely stopped herself from stomping her foot in futility. "That's obvious enough. What kind of disturbance?" "Just a disturbance, your highness." "What kind?" Mirka repeated, trying to mimic the cold demand that always got Dauphine answers. "Nothing to worry about, highness. Just a disturbance." A sharp sound, like an exceptionally loud wind, drifted up from below. "What was that?" Tara tugged her sleeve. "He said that there was a disturbance." "But what was it?" "The disturbance, highness." Mirka let out a furious breath. "Fine. Do you have orders to keep me prisoner?" No, highness. But Wizard Mawes ordered me to guard your tower." "All right, then." Mirka ducked under the halberd and started down the stairs without a second glance. She could hear her lady's maids following, and knew that as soon as they were off the stairs, which were not wide enough for two to walk abreast, they would be tugging her sleeve, asking her to return to the safety of her rooms. Mirka stopped, spinning suddenly. "Tara, go to the kitchen and fetch me a bowl of cherries." The girl opened her mouth, probably to point out that cherries were out of season, but Mirka spoke over her. "Camille," she called the other maid, "run and find that tutor, what was his name, Darren, and tell him I will see him tomorrow if he can bring a recommendation from Kylie of Southbend." Kylie of Southbend was one of Dauphine's childhood companions, and was currently with her on the southern coast. "And you, guard, what are you doing here? Your orders were to guard my room. Back to your post." She knew she sounded like a pissy girl, but her father was still the king. They obeyed, or at least left. What now? She had gotten out of her room, but it wouldn't last long. She could use whatever this disturbance was as a distraction to escape. But to go where? She had no land to run to, no property, no family other than Dauphine and her father. She might be able to escape to a neighboring country and throw herself on the mercy of the king there, but that would only undermine her father's position on the throne. There really was only one thing she could do. She headed for her father's apartments. If she could just talk to him! He was still the king, and at least the last time she had been in court, Mirka would have felt safe in saying that at least the majority of the nobles would side with her father if King Sinef finally decided to throw the new guard out. Mirka was almost to her father's apartments when she slowed. It was darker in these halls than it should have been. Only a few of the torches set in the sconces every few feet were lit, and the windows, already darkened with the early twilight, were veiled with curtains. No matter what was happening in her country and in the palace, and there had been a lot, her mother's death, her father's sudden decline, her sister's strange behavior, even her own confinement, nothing had really scared Mirka. She knew that her father was still king, and he would keep the kingdom safe. Suddenly, she wasn't so sure. It was stupid that a darkened hallway could do this to her, but she could remember running down this hallway as a girl, filled with light and the laughter of the royal family. Even before her father had taken the throne, she remembered playing in this hall with the previous dynasty's princes. It had always been a place of life and safety. And it wasn't anymore. She stopped at her father's door, suddenly afraid to knock. Was her father in there? She hadn't seen him at all in almost 6 months. A quiet voice in the back of her soul asked, was he even her father anymore? He had always been distant, but the man she had seen in the last few years was barely there at all. If she were being truthful with herself, she hadn't exactly been trying hard to see him in the last year. The last time she'd gotten close enough to exchange words with him, he had looked at her like he didn't have the slightest idea who she was. What would she do if she went in there and he couldn't remember her? That slight delay saved her. While she was trying to work up the courage to knock, a voice drifted out from the room. She immediately recognized the scratchy, almost painful voice of Rawls, one of the 3 wizards of the new guard. "Idea where they went?" Another voice answered, slightly quieter, one she was relatively sure belonged to the captain of her father's guard. Mirka leaned closer, putting her ear to the door. "Search the courtyard, cellars. Signs will be reported right to you." Another voice, deeper and slow, Vers, the 3rd wizard, asked, "The princess?" Ma's had her put under guard, Rawls replied. Good. Now would not be a good time for her to go on one of her wanders. I say it's time we dispose of her. At this point, she's more of a liability than an asset. Vayers snorted. So what? We have Cinna execute her for treason? That would seem a bit provocative. People never want to see royalty executed. It makes them feel unsettled. She could die of disease. But we'll discuss it with Maz as soon as we take care of this attack. Captain Tegan, I don't want to see you again until every corner of this palace has been searched 3 times. Mirka stepped back, trying not to panic. She had suddenly realized that being dragged back to her tower by her lady's maids was the least horrifying thing that could be the result of her petty disobedience. She ran for the courtyard. Either her guard or her maids were going to report she had left her tower, and the obvious reason was curiosity as to what was happening. And curiosity was far more innocuous than trying to undermine the men who were in charge of her country. Who wanted to kill her? She was almost at the courtyard when she heard something. A whimper. She looked down and saw a puppy, soft, gold, and small. It was looking up at her with its tongue lolling out. "What are you doing here?" she asked, leaning down to scoop the small animal into her arms. It had pale blue eyes that practically screamed, "Take care of me," and Mirka was already ready to do just that, before she saw the animal's back leg was broken and bent at a painful angle. "Oh, poor thing," Mirka murmured, her own troubles forgotten for just a moment. "Your Highness!" Tara's voice startled the puppy, and it curled into the crook of Mirka's arm, hiding its face. "I really insist that we return to your chambers." Mirka turned to face the girl, noticing for the first time that she looked slightly scared. "Of course. I just wanted to see what was happening." She started straight back towards the stairs. The pup was going to need that leg splinted, and it seemed her life would be vastly lengthened by the new guard not finding her out of her rooms. "Your Highness? Where did you find that dog?" Mirka shrugged. "In the courtyard, by the kennel. I think it got hurt in the commotion. I'm going to take care of it." "Your Highness," Tara reprimanded, but with a spark of her usual humor, Mirka pushed her shoulders back. "It will give me something to do when I'm not studying. Has Camille come back from the tutor yet? Will he be coming tomorrow?" Tara blinked in surprise and rushed to follow Mirka. "She's not back yet, Your Highness. You did demand he bring in a recommendation from someone who's not currently in the palace, so he might feel it was another rejection." Tara would never believe Mirka hadn't realized Kylie was out of town. She thought for a moment, covering her pause by climbing the stairs quickly enough to leave them both out of breath. At the first landing, she glanced back down at her lady's maid. "Didn't Dauphine say he had a recommendation from Kylie? She mentioned him coming recommended by the top scholars in the country, and that certainly includes Kylie." It didn't, actually. But if one assumed Mirka felt a little hero worship for her elder sister's friends, it wasn't an unbelievable thing to say. No, Highness. I don't think your sister, Her Royal Highness, meant that Lady Kylie had written him a recommendation. But I'm sure she would were she here?" Mirka nodded, as if she had never intended it as a pointless hurdle. "Then I guess I will get back to my studies." Mirka hadn't had a tutor since she gave up on learning magic at 19. She knew how to read and write, speak 2 languages, do mathematics, was proficient in strategy and logic, and had read the most respected histories of her time. While she wasn't arrogant enough to think she had nothing to learn, most would consider her almost overly educated. Mirka set her jaw and continued up the stairs. The puppy clutched tightly at her side. The guard was still in the same spot, looking nervous, and Mirka smiled winningly at him, ducking back inside before he could say anything. She let out a sigh of relief when she heard Tara shut the door behind her. This was her space, even if it was also her cage. She crossed to the rug in front of the fireplace, sitting down, and set the puppy down in front of her. She was using the puppy as a distraction, but it was fair for her to look for a distraction. She was, as her father's old guard used to say, deep in shit swamp. She had no idea what the hell to do about her situation, how to help her father, save her kingdom, or herself, but she could take care of this innocent animal. She started gently examining the puppy's leg. It was clearly broken, but was hard to get a good look because the little thing kept twisting around to nuzzle and lick her hand. She couldn't help but let out a laugh, surprised at how much that lifted her mood. "Sit still." To her surprise, the creature did, and she reached up to rub the puppy's ears. They were as soft as the finest silk, and for the moment she picked the animal up and rubbed her face in his fur. It yipped happily, and she giggled. While it was near enough, it took the opportunity to lick her face. It was incredibly cute. "Shouldn't I take that down to the kennel for you? The stable boys can take care of it." Mirka sighed at the sound of her maid's voice. "I was thinking of keeping it as a pet. Can you find it some food and water?" "Really, Highness? Don't you think animals should be kept outside?" "Nonsense! Haven't you ever had a pet? I had a puppy when I was little." "Yes, but that was—" Tara stopped, and in the silence Mirka suddenly understood. That had been before her father had taken the throne, when the wolves had ruled, and Mirka could not think of a single person who had kept a pet since King Cinna had taken the throne. "So am I not allowed to have a pet?" "Your Highness, don't you think that keeping a dog might not be—" But Mirka cut her off. "Obviously, I do not think that." She hated that. She hated that they wouldn't just say what they wanted. They just asked her over and over if she didn't think this or that. It made her responsible for her own cage. It was her choice. But it wasn't, because she knew, now more than ever, that her choices had consequences. "It's just a damn dog. Please go fetch some kitchen scraps. I will not leave the tower, so you don't have to worry about me. All right?" Mirka heard the door shut behind her and glanced around, making sure she was alone, before she clutched her new dog to her chest and let out a shaky breath. Then another, and then she was crying, her shoulders shaking and her chest tight. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. She was supposed to be helping rebuild their country. She wasn't supposed to be locked in a tower like a damsel in distress. But even that would be simpler. If it were just a matter of escaping, she could tie her bedsheets into ropes and shimmy down the side of the tower or something. She laughed, a spark of hysteria sneaking in. She forced herself to stop crying and look down at the dog. It was looking up at her, its pale blue eyes curious. It yipped curiously, licking her hand, and she felt herself smiling. She was definitely keeping it. "All right, little one, let me take a look at that leg of yours." As if it understood what she was saying, the dog twisted around, looking at its broken leg and whimpering. She ran her hand along the broken limb. The puppy whimpered again, but neither pulled away nor tried to bite her, as she had expected. It felt like a clean break, and before it could pull away, she set the bone. The animal let out a pained yelp, but once again did not pull away, if anything huddling closer to her. She pulled a couple of light sticks from the kindling pile by the fireplace, broke them to the right length, and pulled embroidery thread from her sewing kit to tie the sticks in place. Surprisingly, this was when the animal decided to nip at her hand. She was startled enough that she dropped the sticks. "Now, none of that. I need to splint it or it won't heal right." The puppy growled, as if it were disagreeing with her. "Well, I don't care what you think. Broken bones heal crooked when they aren't splinted. That's basic medicine." She put the sticks in place again, and the puppy nipped at her hand again. "I said stop that." It nipped one more time, and when she didn't pull back, it bit the thread and started tugging it away, growling. She couldn't help but laugh, and the dog looked up at her and yipped angrily. "I'm sorry for laughing at you, little one, but you really are cute. Just sit still for a moment longer." The puppy sighed, and Mirka fought the desire to laugh again. It was such a human response, and incredibly cute. She tied off the last knot and rubbed its ears. It barked, pushing up on its good leg to lick her face. "You are an affectionate thing. I guess that means you like me." It barked again, and she scooped it back into her arms, once again burying her face in its silky fur. It made a curious little sound, almost like it was asking her if she was all right, and she snickered, shaking her head. "I'm fine, little one. But what am I going to call you? Are you a boy or a girl?" She turned him over onto his back to check, and he growled. She laughed again. "All right, a boy. How about I call you Silky?" It growled again. "Not dignified enough?" "I could call you Gold." It growled. How about Scout? You were all alone when I found you. You must have been exploring on your own and gotten stepped on or something. So it works." The puppy seemed to think for a moment, then barked. Mirka took that as an agreement. "All right, Scout." She heard the door open behind her and looked over her shoulder. Tara and Camille entered together, whispering amongst themselves. They saw her watching and blushed, bowing minimally. Camille spoke first. "Tutor Darren will be coming tomorrow for your first lesson, if that is all right, Your Highness." Mirka nodded, forcing herself to smile. "Good. Tara, were you able to find something for the puppy?" The girl bobbed a little nod. "Of course, Your Highness." She held out a small bowl. Even at a distance Mirka could see it was mostly vegetable scraps, not what dogs eat, but it was something. "Thank you. Any news on what happened downstairs?" She mainly asked because she knew it would seem odd if she didn't. Now was not the time to push. Tara frowned. "Just that there was someone on the palace grounds that shouldn't have been here." Mirka nodded as if that was all she really needed, and took the kitchen scraps from her. She set the bowl down just off of the rug and set the puppy down next to it. He sniffed the bowl and, almost as if he were trying to be polite, took a small bite before sitting back on the rug and staring up at Mirka, his tongue lolling out of his mouth. "Tara mentioned you found a puppy, Your Highness." "He's cute. What are you calling him?" "Scout." "I like it." Camille reached over Mirka's shoulder to pet the dog, but on the other side of the room, Tara cleared her throat, and Camille blushed. "But don't you think he would be happier out in the garden? Animals don't really belong inside." "He's just a puppy, and I'll make sure he relieves himself outside." She realized she sounded like a child making promises to her parents, and forced herself to stop. She didn't need her maid's permission. "I think I'm going to take an early night." She pushed herself to her feet and started towards her bedroom. To her amusement, the puppy followed, limping along on 3 feet. Tara watched him uncomfortably, herself following to help Mirka undress for bed. Mirka glanced down at the puppy as she was undressing and noticed he was chewing at the splint. "Scout, no." He looked up at her, but immediately went back to chewing at the threads holding the splint together. She held up a hand to pause Tara, leaning down and gently pulling the puppy's leg away from his mouth. He growled, but also licked her hand. When she dismissed Tara, the girl reached down to scoop up the puppy, but before she could, Mirka stopped her. "He can stay here tonight." "Your Highness." "Lord, Tara, he's just a puppy. What's he going to do, gnaw on my foot? He's not even big enough to climb on the bed." "Yes, Your Highness," the girl murmured, bowing her way out of the room. It was absurdly early to go to bed, but since the darkness had been coming earlier, Mirka had been going to bed earlier, and she wanted some time without her maid staring down her neck. She was just laying down when she heard whimpering. She leaned out of the bed, reaching down to scoop the puppy up onto the mattress. It yipped happily and limped over to lick her face. "All right, that's cute, but that's enough of that." She picked him back up, settling him against her stomach. He curled against her, yawning almost pointedly, and she smiled at him. He was precious. She ran her fingers along his snout, tapping him gently on the nose, and he scrunched his nose, leaning forward to lick her fingers. Looking at him more closely, he was small, but he wasn't really a puppy, which was odd. All the dogs in the kennel were big hunting dogs, and though this one looked a bit like the large, half-wild hunters her father had kept when she was young, it was clearly never going to be a large dog. She shook her head. She had much bigger problems to worry about than where her dog had come from. She lay back, once again pulling the dog splint out of its mouth. "Now don't you make me regret letting you sleep up here."